2 cops mocked me for saying please stop after I was assaulted, then high-fived. When I begged them to take my report, one sneered, "You're drunk, wasting time." I stared. 8 months later, he stood in court in an orange jumpsuit and admitted it. I stumbled into the police station that night, my dress torn, blood trickling down my knees, desperately needing help. But the officers who were supposed to protect me didn't see a victim. They saw just another drunk girl who asked for it. What they didn't know was that I was the mayor's daughter, and their cruel dismissal was about to ignite a firestorm that would burn their entire world down. It was 2 a.m., and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I approached the front desk. My face was swollen, makeup smeared everywhere. I'd grown up around these guys, seen them at city events, but tonight, they simply didn't recognize me. Before I could even get the words out, Officer Phillips looked up from his phone, saw the vodka stains on my dress, my messy appearance, and rolled his eyes. "Let me guess," he sneered, not even bothering to stand up. "You got too drunk at a party and now you regret hooking up with someone?" He actually leaned back and called to his partner. "Hey Mitchell, we got another one of those Saturday night specials. Girl who can't handle her liquor wants to take it out on a man." My throat closed up. Tears streamed down my face even harder, but I forced the words out. "I was attacked. Someone hurt me. I need help." Phillips finally stood, walking around the desk, his eyes raking over my torn dress with an expression so utterly disgusted I wanted to disappear. "Look at that dress," he said to Mitchell, who'd wandered over. "Barely covers anything. You went out dressed like that, got blackout drunk, and now you're surprised someone got the wrong idea." He actually laughed like my pain was a joke. "How much did you drink, sweetheart? Can you even remember what happened? Or are you just assuming?" Mitchell pointed at the bruises already forming on my arms. "Those are probably from falling over drunk, not from someone grabbing her. Look at her knees. She's been crawling around. Probably puked in some bushes and made up a story." He grabbed my wrist, pressing hard on the bruises. Cried out, "These could be from anything. You girls always bruise easy when you're wasted." When I begged them, pleaded with them to just take my report, Phillips pulled out a form, but made a whole performance of how utterly pointless it was. He started asking questions in a baby voice like I was an idiot. "Can you spell your name for me? Do you remember where you live? What about the bad man's name? Or were you too drunk to ask?" Each question dripped with pure sarcasm, and Mitchell just laughed along. Then Phillips crumpled the form and tossed it into the trash. "This is a waste of taxpayer resources." Mitchell, not content, decided I was probably lying to cover up cheating on a boyfriend and announced his brilliant theory to everyone in the station. "She hooked up with someone. Boyfriend found out. Now she needs an excuse. They always pull the assault card when they get caught being sluts." He called over other officers and soon, 5 cops were standing around me, debating whether I was lying to avoid getting dumped or lying for attention. Phillips made me recount what happened, but kept interrupting, poking holes in my story. When I mentioned trying to say no, he actually laughed and said, "How would he hear you over the music?" Then the absolute worst part. He made me repeat the most horrific details while he and Mitchell acted it out mockingly. Mitchell pretending to be me in a high-pitched voice saying, "Oh no, please stop." They high-fived after their disgusting performance, while I stood there shaking, feeling like I was going to throw up. Phillips then told me I could be arrested for public intoxication and filing a false report. "You're drunk. You're wasting police time, and you're probably going to ruin some poor guy's life because you're embarrassed about being easy," he said, pulling out handcuffs. "Maybe a night in the drunk tank will teach you not to cry wolf." Mitchell added that they should do a cavity search to check for drugs, because girls like her usually have something hidden. When I tried to back away, sobbing that I just wanted to go home, Phillips grabbed my arm and slammed me against the wall. "You're resisting," he snarled. He cuffed my hands behind my back while Mitchell dumped out my purse, everything clattering to the floor. "Let's see what drugs made her hallucinate an assault," he said, crushing my phone under his boot. Phillips started patting me down roughly, his hands lingering in places they absolutely shouldn't, making me feel violated all over again. Mitchell was filling out booking paperwork when he finally got to my ID. He glanced at it, started to toss it aside, then froze. I watched his face drain of color as he looked at it again, then showed it to Phillips, whose hands immediately dropped from my arms. "Holy," Mitchell whispered. "This is the mayor's daughter." Philip stared at my ID, then at me. I could see the exact moment he realized he'd just handcuffed and assaulted the daughter of the man who controlled his entire career. He fumbled with the handcuff keys, his hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice before getting them into the lock. The metal clicked off my wrists, and I rubbed the red marks while Mitchell dropped to his knees, frantically scooping up my scattered belongings, shoving them back into my purse. "Miss Whitfield, there's been a terrible misunderstanding," Phillips kept repeating, his face now completely white. Mitchell even tried to smooth down my torn dress, but I jerked away from his touch, my whole body trembling as I grabbed my crushed phone and purse from the floor. Philip started babbling about taking my report right away, about finding whoever hurt me, but I was already backing toward the door, unable to speak through the tears and absolute rage choking my throat. Mitchell actually begged me not to leave, said they needed to document everything properly, but I kept moving backward until I hit the door. Phillips took a step toward me and I screamed at him, "Never touch me again." The sound ripped from my throat so loud that every cop in the station turned to stare. I shoved through the door and stumbled across the parking lot, leaving bloody footprints from my torn knees on the asphalt. Phillips and Mitchell followed me outside, still calling after me, but I made it to my car and locked the doors before they could reach me. My hands were shaking too hard to even get the key in the ignition. I just sat there sobbing, watching through the windshield as the two officers argued by the entrance, probably trying to figure out how to save their careers. It took me almost an hour to calm down enough to drive. When I finally made it home at 4:15 a.m., my parents were awake in the living room, my mother pacing, my father on the phone. They both rushed to me. My mother gasped at my torn dress and bruised face, while my father demanded to know what happened. I tried to explain about Tyler Morrison attacking me at the party, then told them everything Phillips and Mitchell did at the station. I watched my father's political composure completely shatter. He grabbed his phone and started dialing the police chief's home number, not caring that it was 4:30 in the morning, shouting about his officers assaulting victims and demanding immediate suspensions. My mother held me on the couch while I sobbed, carefully examining each bruise and scrape, tears running down her face as she documented everything with her phone camera. Within 30 minutes, Chief Gonzalez was at our door with 2 female officers and someone from Victim Services, looking absolutely sick as he took my statement about both assaults. When I described Phillips groping me during the pat-down and Mitchell destroying my phone, the chief's jaw clenched so tight I thought he might break his teeth. The female officers bagged my torn dress as evidence, while my mother drove me to the hospital. A nurse spent 2 hours documenting and photographing every single injury. The bruises on my arms had turned darker, showing clear finger marks where I'd been grabbed, and the rape kit exam was so invasive I threw up twice. My father stayed in the hallway, fielding phone calls from lawyers and city officials, his voice carrying through the walls as he demanded criminal charges against his own officers. By the next afternoon, Phillips and Mitchell had been suspended. The story leaked to the media. News vans parked outside our house, reporters knocking constantly. My father held a press conference announcing a full investigation into police misconduct, carefully not mentioning my name, even though everyone already knew it was the mayor's daughter. I couldn't leave my room. I just sat on my bed, alternating between feeling completely numb and having panic attacks whenever I heard footsteps. My mother brought me soup I couldn't eat, sitting quietly beside me. Everything from that night blurred into one long nightmare. The party and the police station mixing together until I couldn't tell which violation was worse. 3 days later, my father sat down next to me on my bed. His voice was calm, but his jaw was clenched. Tyler, he explained, came from one of the richest families in town. Their lawyer was already claiming everything at the party was consensual. The police union had hired attorneys for Phillips and Mitchell, saying they were just doing their job with a drunk girl who wouldn't cooperate. My father's hand shook as he showed me the official statements on his phone. Everyone was protecting themselves instead of me. The next morning, my new phone buzzed with a text from Manny Perez, a guy I sort of knew from a psychology class. He said he'd been at the party and saw Tyler basically carrying me upstairs when I could barely walk. What he wrote next made something crack open in my chest. It's like the officer's whole attitude flipped the second they saw your ID. Your pain only mattered because of who your dad was, not because you were hurt. He mentioned he had videos and wanted to help if I'd let him. It was the first time anyone besides my parents had said they believed something bad happened to me. Manny suggested meeting at a coffee shop downtown. My mother drove me there and waited in the car while I walked inside on legs that felt like jelly. Manny was already sitting in the back corner with his laptop open. He stood up awkwardly, then just pulled out a chair and slid his laptop across the table. The first video showed the party at 1:15 a.m. Tyler holding me up, me stumbling and swaying. My dress was normal then, my makeup fine, but anyone could see I was way too drunk to know what was happening. The second video, time-stamped 1:47 a.m., showed me running out the front door, my dress torn, black mascara streaking my face. Manny had calculated it. 32 minutes. That's when everything happened. He pulled up more videos on his phone, showing me getting progressively more drunk, Tyler constantly bringing me drinks. Then Manny dropped a bombshell. His dad was the district attorney. He'd been watching Tyler for months after his friend Sarah was assaulted, but didn't report it. Manny opened a folder on his laptop, full of screenshots from group chats where Tyler bragged about getting girls wasted. One message: I like them too drunk to remember because then they can't cause problems later. Another: Tyler telling friends what he did to a cheerleader who passed out. Manny had been collecting this for months, waiting for someone brave enough to come forward. Now he wanted to give it all to his dad. 3 days later, the police union released what they claimed was the full body cam footage from the station. The video only showed parts where I looked drunk and angry. Somehow the cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned during all the parts where Phillips grabbed me and said those horrible things. My father immediately demanded the original server data, but the IT department claimed it was corrupted during routine maintenance. Nobody believed it. 2 days after that, Captain Gloria Torres from Internal Affairs showed up at our house without calling. She sat in our living room and told us she'd been trying to investigate Phillips for years, but complaints kept disappearing. Then she leaned forward and whispered, "There was a security camera in the booking area that most cops didn't know about. I'm pulling the footage before anyone realizes it exists." Going back to college felt impossible, but my parents said I needed to try to keep my life normal. 12 days after everything, I walked onto campus feeling like everyone was staring. Whispers followed me. In English class, I sat by the door ready to run. Every time a guy talked behind me or someone laughed too loud, my body tensed, my heart raced. My professor kept asking if I was okay. I was sweating, shaking through the entire lecture. 2 days later, Tyler's family filed a $2 million defamation lawsuit against my father. Their lawyer held a press conference, claiming my father was using his political position to destroy an innocent young man over what they called regretted consensual activity. They demanded a public apology. My father actually laughed when he read the lawsuit. "They've just made a huge mistake," he told me. "Now I can demand evidence during discovery, including Tyler's phone and computer." Within 2 days of the lawsuit going public, Manny started getting messages from other girls. 3 women reached out privately with their own stories about Tyler, and they all had proof. One had saved texts where Tyler admitted he liked getting girls too drunk to fight back. Another had recorded him laughing with friends about the cheerleader he assaulted while she was passed out. Manny spent hours documenting everything, building a file that showed Tyler's pattern going back years. 4 nights later, my mother found me in the bathroom at 2 a.m., scissors in my hand, cutting off chunks of my long blonde hair. She didn't say anything at first, just gently took the scissors and started helping me cut it properly while we both cried. Hair fell all over the floor. When she finished, she held my face and whispered that I was still me. Looking in the mirror, I saw someone I didn't recognize. Short, choppy hair, dark circles under hollow eyes. 20 days passed in a blur of sleeping pills and staying in bed. Reporters kept calling our home number somehow. Then Captain Torres called my dad, asking for a private meeting. She arrived after dark, laptop tucked under her arm, checking over her shoulder before coming inside. She set it up on our kitchen table. My parents and I gathered around, her hands shaking slightly as she opened an encrypted file. The screen showed grainy black and white footage from a camera I hadn't even noticed in the police station ceiling, positioned perfectly above the front desk. Torres hit play. There I was stumbling through the door, dress torn, knees bloody, exactly like I remembered. The footage had no sound, but you could see everything clearly. Phillips looking up, rolling his eyes before I even reached the desk. When he walked around to look at my outfit, the camera caught him perfectly as his hands moved over my body during what he called a pat-down, lingering way too long on my chest and between my legs while I stood there frozen. Mitchell's boot came down on my phone, pieces scattering as he ground it under his heel. The worst part was watching them high-five each other after their little performance, mocking me. Both of them laughing while I stood there shaking and crying. My dad immediately pulled out 3 different USB drives and made Torres copy the file to each one. Then he sent encrypted copies to his personal lawyer and 2 other trusted contacts within minutes. Torres said, "This is criminal sexual assault by officers. They are going to prison for what they did to you." 2 days later, the district attorney's office filed formal criminal charges against Phillips and Mitchell for sexual assault, destruction of evidence, and civil rights violations under color of law. The police union called an emergency meeting that turned into chaos, half the officers defending their colleagues, the other half trying to distance themselves from criminals in uniform. My mom, Rachel, took indefinite leave from her job as a marketing director to stay home with me. She didn't push me, didn't ask questions. We spent quiet mornings in the garden, planting herbs and repotting succulents, her hands guiding mine as we carefully separated the small plants. She taught me how to let the cut ends dry before planting them, saying something beautiful could grow from broken pieces, though we both knew she meant more than just the plants. Manny called to tell me Tyler's fraternity brothers had started sending him death threats. Someone had slashed all 4 tires on his car in the campus parking lot. He filed police reports but said it was worth it. His dad prosecuted rapists for a living and taught him that staying silent made you complicit in the crime. 4 days later, Tyler was arrested at his parents' country club during their annual charity gala. The police walked him out in handcuffs past hundreds of society members in their formal wear. 2 other girls who'd contacted Manny after seeing his posts had officially filed reports, giving them enough evidence. Tyler's mother screamed that my father had orchestrated this humiliation, not knowing the other victims even existed, or that the arrest timing was purely coincidental. The following month, my father faced a vote of no confidence from the city council. Phillips and Mitchell's supporters claimed he was abusing his power for personal revenge. During the public hearing, he connected his laptop to the projection system and played the security footage for the packed chamber without any warning. The room went completely silent as they watched their officers assault me. Several people gasped when Phillips's hands moved over my body. One council member, who had been defending the officers, stood up and walked out, saying he had daughters, before the video even finished playing. The vote failed 8-2, but the 2 dissenting members claimed the video was staged and demanded an FBI investigation into my father's corruption. I started seeing Dr. Sarah Winters twice a week for trauma therapy. The first 3 sessions I could barely say what happened without my vision going black and my body going numb. She taught me grounding techniques, naming 5 things I could see, 4 I could touch, 3 I could hear, 2 I could smell, 1 I could taste. The prosecutor handling Tyler's case met with Manny and me to prepare us. She warned that Tyler's family had hired the best defense team money could buy. They'd claim I was drinking willingly, that I pursued Tyler, that I had a history of false accusations, even though none of it was true because juries sometimes believe those lies anyway. I tried going back to normal activities. I joined my economics study group at the library. But when a male classmate touched my shoulder to get my attention about a homework question, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor hyperventilating while campus security tried to get me to breathe into a paper bag. Everyone in the library stared at me like I was crazy. 6 weeks later, I sat in the back row of the courthouse, watching Phillips and Barnes get formally indicted on multiple felony charges. The grand jury had seen the unedited body cam footage that Internal Affairs recovered from a backup server, plus witness statements from other cops. Phillips kept turning around to glare at me. His lawyer argued the video was taken out of context, that I'd been aggressive and uncooperative. The judge didn't buy it. Bail was set at $100,000 each, which the police union posted within an hour. 3 days after that, Captain Torres called us into her basement office. They'd moved her desk after taking away her regular office on the 3rd floor. She showed us her reassignment papers. All active cases moved, removed from the promotion list she'd been on for 2 years. She said they wanted her to quit, but she had 18 months until retirement. They'll have to fire me if they want me gone. That weekend, my dad asked me to come to his study after another city council meeting where half the members called for his resignation. He sat at his desk with his head in his hands. When he looked up, I saw tears running down his face, something I hadn't seen since Grandma died. He kept saying he'd failed me twice, first by not protecting me from Tyler, and then by not protecting me from his own police force. We sat there for an hour together without talking, both of us carrying guilt that belonged to the people who'd hurt us. 2 days later, the FBI showed up at our house with a team of agents. They spent 6 hours going through both assaults, asking about the destroyed hospital evidence, the edited body cam footage, every detail of what happened at the station. The lead agent told us they'd found similar patterns in 12 other cases over 5 years where evidence disappeared or was altered when cops were accused of misconduct. Meanwhile, Manny kept digging into Tyler's past. He found records showing Tyler had been expelled from private school for inappropriate conduct with the younger student. But his parents made a huge donation, and the records vanished from the official files. He tracked down 3 girls from Tyler's high school who said he'd assaulted them too, but their parents were threatened with lawsuits if they went public. Every piece of evidence Manny found made me feel less crazy. Like, maybe I wasn't overreacting or making things up like everyone kept saying. Tyler's preliminary hearing happened 3 days later. His lawyers immediately moved to dismiss all charges, calling the other victims copycat accusers, just looking for attention after seeing media coverage. But Manny had organized all his evidence into a timeline with videos, text messages, and documentation of Tyler's pattern going back years. When the judge reviewed everything, including sworn statements from the other girls, he ruled there was enough evidence for a full trial. Tyler's mom jumped up, screaming that we were destroying an innocent boy's future, that I was a liar who'd seduced her son and then cried rape when he wouldn't date me. Security had to drag her out while she kept screaming that she'd make sure I paid for ruining her baby's life. That same week, Phillips and Barnes started showing up on podcasts, telling anyone who'd listen that they were victims of cancel culture, a political hit job by my father. They raised $50,000 through crowdfunding from supporters who believed their story about me, being a drunk girl who attacked them first. Every interview felt like being assaulted again, hearing them describe me as violent and unstable, while painting themselves as heroes. By then I was failing 2 classes. My academic advisor pulled up my grades and suggested a medical withdrawal. It felt like admitting Tyler and the officers had won. My mom sat with me while I cried about dropping out, reminding me that healing wasn't linear, and stepping back wasn't giving up. A few days later, Captain Torres secretly met our lawyer at a coffee shop and handed over personnel files she'd copied before they moved her to the basement. Phillips had 6 previous excessive force complaints that all got dismissed without investigation, and Barnes had 4 similar complaints. One file showed a homeless woman had accused Phillips of sexually assaulting her during an arrest 2 years ago, but the case closed when she mysteriously disappeared and never showed up for her court date. Our lawyer said this was exactly the pattern the FBI was looking for, proof that the department had been covering for bad cops for years. 2 days after that, I went to the grocery store for the first time in weeks, trying to feel normal again. In the cereal aisle, I saw Tyler's girlfriend, Ashley, staring at me with pure hatred. She walked right up to me and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Some girls will do anything for attention, even ruin innocent men's lives." Other shoppers stopped to stare as she kept going, saying I was a pathetic liar who couldn't handle being rejected. I abandoned my cart and ran to my car, where I sat shaking for an hour, unable to drive, feeling like nowhere was safe anymore. My phone started buzzing with texts from my mom saying to come home right away, that something big was happening. I drove home with my hands still shaking and found my parents watching the news. Manny's dad was standing at a podium, surrounded by reporters. He announced he was stepping aside from all 3 cases because of conflict of interest. But before leaving, he'd found proof of a massive cover-up at the police station going back 8 years, with at least 20 cops involved. The reporters went crazy, shouting questions while he walked away. 2 days later, a woman named Janet Reeves showed up at our house wearing a plain black suit and carrying boxes of files. She sat across from me at our kitchen table and explained she'd put dirty cops in prison before, but warned me the trial would be brutal because they'd make me relive every detail and question every choice I made that night. She pointed to a folder and said the video of the officers attacking me at the station was the smoking gun most victims never get. That night I couldn't sleep, so I started writing everything down in a notebook. Not just what Tyler did or what the cops did, but the way I jump when doors slam now, and how I can't wear dresses anymore, and the panic attacks that come out of nowhere. My therapist said it might help in court, but really I was writing because keeping it all inside felt like drowning. 3 days later, Manny called to say 3 cops had come forward as whistleblowers about something called the Brotherhood that covered up crimes for each other. One of them had recorded Officer Phillips bragging about putting women in their place, and another had Barnes on tape laughing about destroying evidence in other cases. Manny and I started meeting at a coffee shop every week to go through all the documents and evidence together. He never looked at me with pity or treated me like I was broken. He just worked through everything like we were partners trying to solve a puzzle. He told me about watching his dad work on his first rape case when he was younger and how it changed the way he understood what consent meant and why these cases mattered so much. Tyler's lawyers got his trial date set for 3 months out, but immediately started filing motions to delay everything even longer. That same day, someone leaked my full name and photo to some website that published an article calling me a liar who was covering up cheating on a boyfriend. Within hours, my phone was flooded with messages from strangers saying they hoped I got raped for real this time, or that I should kill myself for ruining an innocent man's life. 2 days later, I woke up to dozens of FBI agents surrounding the police station with boxes and computers being carried out while officers got walked to cars in handcuffs, though Phillips and Barnes weren't there. The chief held a press conference that afternoon announcing his retirement and claiming he never knew about any corruption, which made my dad laugh bitterly at the TV. 3 days after that, I came home from therapy to find liar spray painted across my apartment door in red paint that looked like blood. My roommates helped me pack my stuff, but I could tell they were relieved I was leaving because they'd been getting threats too, just for living with me. Moving back into my childhood bedroom felt like giving up on being an adult, but nowhere else felt safe anymore. Captain Torres showed up at our house at midnight a few days later with boxes of evidence she'd copied before they locked her out of the station. She spread files across our dining table, saying if she was going down, she was taking everyone with her, and started showing us reports that had been buried and complaints that got ignored for years. 2 days after that, my phone lit up with news alerts that Phillips had been arrested on federal civil rights charges after the FBI found texts where he wrote that I needed to learn that reporting rape had consequences. Barnes got arrested 2 hours later while coaching his son's baseball game with all the other parents watching. The FBI put him in handcuffs right there on the field. 3 weeks later, I watched on the courthouse livestream as Phillips and Barnes stood in orange jumpsuits, while the federal prosecutor laid out the evidence against them. Their lawyer kept trying to interrupt, saying the text messages where Phillips wrote about teaching consequences were just guys blowing off steam. But the judge cut him off and said, "Conspiracy to violate civil rights doesn't become legal just because you call it locker room talk." The prosecutor showed more texts where Barnes bragged about making girls cry during fake cavity searches, and Phillips responded with laughing emojis and suggestions for making it worse next time. When their lawyer asked for bail, arguing they had families and ties to the community, the prosecutor pulled up flight records showing Phillips had been researching non-extradition countries, and Barnes had withdrawn his entire retirement fund in cash. The judge denied bail immediately, calling them dangers to the community who'd shown a pattern of using their badges to terrorize vulnerable women. 2 days later, my mom came home from her first day back at work to find me curled up on the bathroom floor, unable to breathe after watching news coverage that showed Phillips's wife crying about how this was ruining their children's lives. My whole body shook as I kept saying they'd get out. They'd come for me. Their friends would hurt me for destroying their lives. And Mom just sat on the cold tile holding me while I sobbed until my throat was raw. She didn't tell me it would be okay or that I was safe now because we both knew that wasn't true yet. 3 days after that, a process server showed up at our door with a subpoena from Tyler's lawyers demanding every medical record I'd ever had, including therapy notes from when I was 16 and saw a counselor for test anxiety. My lawyer Sarah called it a fishing expedition, trying to find anything they could twist into me being mentally unstable or prone to making things up. But the judge granted it anyway. They got everything. My whole life spread out for strangers to pick and weaponize against me. At my therapist appointment that week, I met a woman named Amy in the waiting room who recognized me from the news and quietly told me Phillips had done the same thing to her 3 years ago when she was 19 and drunk after a concert. She'd never reported it because she'd watched him destroy another girl who tried, spreading rumors about her being a drug addict until she dropped a complaint. We sat there for an hour, her showing me old journal entries she had documenting everything. Both of us crying as we realized how many others there probably were. She said she'd testify about his actions, even though it meant everyone would know. 3 days later, Manny called me at 2 a.m., his voice shaking as he told me to check my email immediately. Someone had sent security footage. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. as Tyler carried my limp body upstairs, my arms hanging down. At 12:31 a.m., the camera caught him coming back downstairs, high-fiving 3 of his fraternity brothers who were waiting in the hallway. One of them made a gesture I can't even describe. Manny said a fraternity member who'd been disgusted by the whole thing had stolen the footage before they could delete it, and sent it anonymously, unable to live with staying silent anymore. My lawyer filed it with the court the next morning. 2 days later, Tyler's legal team scrambled to offer a plea deal where he'd admit to misdemeanor assault. No jail time, just probation and community service, claiming it was a generous offer that would spare me from testifying. The prosecutor, Sarah, brought the offer to me, professionally obligated to present it, even though her face showed exactly what she thought of it. I told her no immediately, my voice steady for the first time in months as I said, "He doesn't get to destroy me and walk away with less punishment than someone gets for shoplifting." She smiled and said she'd hoped I'd say that, then filed our rejection that afternoon. The police union sent out a statement 3 days later officially cutting ties with Phillips and Barnes, stating they don't defend officers who violate their oath and betray the public trust. Within hours of that announcement, my lawyer started getting calls from other officers who suddenly wanted to share information about the Brotherhood, trying to distance themselves before the FBI investigation reached them. Captain Torres called to tell me 6 officers had already given statements about witnessing Phillips and Barnes assault or threaten other women over the years. 2 days later, I had to go back to campus with my mom and a security guard to clean out my dorm room since I'd withdrawn from classes. Walking through the quad where I used to feel safe felt like walking through a minefield. Every face potentially someone who blamed me for what happened to Tyler. Near the student union, I saw a group of his friends laughing at something on their phones and had to physically hold myself back from screaming at them about how they could laugh when their friend was a rapist. My mom grabbed my arm and steered me away before I could do something I'd regret. Captain Gloria Torres filed her whistleblower lawsuit against the city that week. Her lawyer wheeled in 12 boxes of evidence documenting 20 years of retaliation for trying to investigate officer misconduct. The lawsuit detailed how she'd been passed over for promotions, given the worst shifts, and had her reports buried whenever she tried to expose corruption. The city council called an emergency closed-door meeting when they realized her lawsuit could bankrupt the entire city if she won, especially with the documented evidence of them knowing about the Brotherhood and doing nothing. 2 days later, I went to my first support group meeting, sitting in a circle with 7 other women while they shared stories of assaults that happened 5, 10, even 20 years ago with no justice ever served. One woman talked about evidence that got lost, another about a prosecutor who refused to file charges, another about a judge who said she shouldn't have been drinking if she didn't want to be raped. I couldn't speak when it came to my turn. The weight of having video evidence and witnesses in support, when they had nothing, made me feel like I was drowning in survivor's guilt. The facilitator said it was okay to just listen, but I could feel their eyes on me, knowing I was the mayor's daughter whose case was all over the news, the one who might actually get justice when they never would. 3 weeks passed before the recall petition hit my dad's desk with 20,000 signatures demanding a special election, because he'd supposedly turned our city into his personal revenge project against the police department. The town hall meeting they forced him to attend was packed with angry people holding signs that said things like "Justice, not vengeance," and "Restore order," while news cameras rolled from every angle. My dad stood at the podium looking exhausted but determined as people screamed at him about wasting tax money on witch hunts and destroying good cops' lives over one drunk girl's lies. When someone yelled that he should resign in shame, he gripped the microphone and said if fighting for assault victims meant he was guilty of vengeance, then he'd wear that label proudly. 2 days later, the FBI called to tell us they'd found something huge in their investigation of Tyler's dad's construction company. After following a paper trail of $50,000 in payments to people who'd been at previous parties where girls got hurt, the agent explained that adding financial crimes and witness tampering to Tyler's charges meant he could face 30 years instead of the 5 to 7 his lawyer had been expecting for just the assault. Manny texted me that night asking if I wanted to meet up, because he'd been getting death threats too, and needed to talk to someone who understood what this felt like. We sat in his car at the overlook watching the sun go down while he told me his dad always said standing up to predators was dangerous but necessary, and that's why he couldn't back down even though someone had spray-painted "snitch" on his apartment door. He reached over and squeezed my hand, and for a minute we just sat there. Two broken people who'd found each other in the middle of this nightmare. The next morning brought news that Phillips's wife had filed for divorce, and given prosecutors recordings she'd been making for years of him bragging about things he'd done to women during traffic stops and arrests. She'd been documenting everything while waiting for the right time to leave safely, and now her evidence meant they could add domestic violence and witness tampering to his federal charges. 3 days later, I walked into the Rape Crisis Center and asked if they needed volunteers because I couldn't stand sitting at home anymore, feeling useless while everyone else was fighting. They put me on the phones right away, and suddenly I was the voice on the other end when someone called. Terrified and alone, giving them resources and telling them they weren't crazy for feeling scared. It was the first time since everything started that I felt like maybe I had some purpose beyond just being the victim everyone was fighting about. The state attorney general held a press conference 2 days later announcing they were launching a statewide investigation into police sexual misconduct, using our city as the test case for new protocols. Phillips and Mitchell's faces were all over the national news as examples of everything wrong with how cops handle assault cases, while reporters dug up story after story of other women they dismissed or threatened over the years. Someone sent me a photo of a foreclosure notice on Phillips's house because he couldn't pay his legal fees anymore. And even though part of me knew I should feel bad about his family losing their home, mostly I just felt empty. Tyler's fraternity got suspended from campus after 12 more girls came forward about parties where they'd been drugged or assaulted by different brothers over the past 3 years. The university started Title IX investigations into 43 members, while the fraternity president went on local news claiming they were being unfairly targeted, and that these were just regretful hookups being blown out of proportion. Within days, the brothers started turning on each other, each one trying to cut deals by testifying about what the others had done at these parties. I actually had a good day on day 135 where I went to lunch with my mom and watched a movie without thinking about any of it for almost 4 hours straight. Then the guilt crashed down on me so hard I threw up in the theater bathroom, because how could I feel normal when nothing was fixed and those other girls from the support group would never get justice like I might? My therapist spent our whole next session reminding me that healing meant having good days too. And I didn't know anyone perpetual suffering to prove I'd been hurt. 3 days later, the federal prosecutor called to say plea negotiations had started for Phillips and Mitchell with offers of 10 to 15 years if they'd cooperate fully and name all the Brotherhood members. Their lawyers knew going to trial meant 20 to 30 years minimum, so they had 48 hours to decide whether to take the deal or risk everything in court. Then Tyler's lawyer claimed to have a medical emergency that required immediate surgery, which was his third excuse to delay the trial after a family emergency and a scheduling conflict with another case. The judge finally lost patience and said this was absolutely the last postponement, setting a firm trial date 6 weeks out that happened to fall right during finals week, if I even decided to go back to school. 2 weeks later, the prosecutor called with news that made my dad drop his coffee mug in the kitchen. Barnes had cracked under pressure and taken the plea deal, handing over a 47-page statement that detailed everything about the Brotherhood's operations over the past 15 years. The prosecutor read parts of it to us over speakerphone while my mom gripped my hand so tight it hurt. Barnes named 18 officers who'd covered up assaults, 3 judges who'd thrown out cases for bribes, and 2 prosecutors who deliberately lost trials when victims wouldn't back down. The list included names we recognized from city events, people who'd eaten at our dinner table, officers who'd played golf with my dad every Sunday. Barnes had kept records of everything. Photos of cash exchanges in parking garages, recordings of officers laughing about destroying evidence, emails planning which cases to bury. The corruption went so deep that Internal Affairs had to bring in federal investigators, because half their own department was implicated. Phillips tried to hold out for 2 more days before his lawyer told him Barnes had a recording of him bragging about what he'd done to me in the station that night. The recording was from a bar 3 days after my assault. Phillips describing in detail how he'd made me cry, how he'd grabbed me and thrown me against the wall, how he'd enjoyed watching me break down. But Phillips still refused the deal, hiring new lawyers who went on the news claiming Barnes was making everything up to save himself. That story lasted exactly 4 hours before Barnes's lawyer released one of the recordings to the press. Phillips's voice clear as day, talking about planting drugs on a teenager who'd filed a complaint against him. Within hours, every cop Barnes had named was scrambling to make their own deals, each one trying to flip on someone higher up the chain. 3 days later, my dad won the recall election with 67% of the vote after Barnes's testimony went public. That night, he held me in the living room while we both cried. Him shaking with relief and exhaustion. Me feeling like I'd been holding my breath for months. He kept saying we were winning, but I wasn't sure what winning meant anymore when I still woke up screaming most nights. 2 days after that, I had to sit through 8 hours of deposition for Tyler's trial. His lawyer asking about every guy I'd ever kissed, every drink I'd ever had, every party I'd attended since middle school. He implied I'd planned everything to get attention, that I'd set Tyler up because he'd rejected me, that my father had orchestrated the whole thing for political gain. I stayed calm, even when he showed photos from my social media, asking why I dressed like that if I didn't want male attention. I knew the fraternity video would destroy their whole defense. Tyler carrying my unconscious body while his friends cheered. The lawyer tried to make me cry, asking if I was a virgin before that night, if I'd ever had rough sex, if I enjoyed being dominated. I answered every question in a flat voice while my lawyer objected over and over. The court reporter typing every disgusting word. 3 days later, Manny came over to study, bringing his LSAT prep books and making me quiz him while I tried to catch up on the semester I'd basically missed. We'd become actual friends somehow. Him checking on me every day without being asked, bringing me coffee when I had to go to court, sitting with me when the panic attacks hit. He decided to become a prosecutor like his dad, wanting to put guys like Tyler away. While I still had no idea who I wanted to be when this finally ended, I wasn't even sure it would ever really end. Not when I saw Tyler's face every time I closed my eyes. The jury selection started on day 155. Tyler's lawyers using every single challenge to exclude young women. Anyone who'd posted about believing victims, anyone who looked like they might have a daughter my age. They wanted old conservative men who'd see Tyler as a good boy who'd made one mistake, not a predator who drugged and assaulted an unconscious girl. I had to sit in the courtroom watching them dismiss juror after juror, looking for people who'd be most likely to blame me for what Tyler did. His lawyers asked if potential jurors thought women ever lied about assault, if they believed drinking meant accepting consequences, if they thought the way someone dressed sent signals. 3 days later, Captain Gloria called to say she'd won her whistleblower lawsuit, the city agreeing to pay her $3.2 million plus full reinstatement with back pay. She was donating half to the rape crisis center that had helped me, and using the rest to start a foundation training officers on how to properly handle assault cases. She wanted me to speak at the first training session, but I couldn't even think about standing in front of cops again. Not after what Phillips and Mitchell had done. The night before trial, I couldn't sleep and ended up in the kitchen at 3 o'clock in the morning pulling out my grandmother's recipe box. My mom found me mixing cookie dough with tears running down my face. Flour everywhere. The familiar motions the only thing keeping me from completely falling apart. She didn't say anything, just washed her hands and started helping. The two of us baking 4 dozen cookies in total silence while the house stayed dark around us. Neither of us ate any of them. Just kept baking batch after batch until the sun came up and we had to get dressed for court. Opening statements started at 9 o'clock. The prosecutor immediately playing the fraternity's own video on the huge courtroom screen. You could see everything clearly. Tyler carrying my completely limp body while his friends laughed and made gross comments. My dress riding up, my head hanging back at an awful angle. Several jurors looked sick watching it, but Tyler's lawyer stood up and actually argued I was laying dead as part of some role-play fantasy we'd agreed to earlier. He said I'd asked Tyler to carry me to his room, that I pretended to be unconscious because it was part of our game, that the video actually proved Tyler thought he had consent. The prosecutor showed frame by frame how my eyes were rolled back, how my arms hung completely lifeless, how Tyler had to adjust his grip multiple times because dead weight is hard to carry. The defense attorney claimed those were acting choices I'd made, that I was remarkably committed to the role-play scenario, that Tyler was just going along with what he thought I wanted. 2 jurors looked disgusted by the defense's theory, but 3 older men were nodding like it made sense. The next day, I testified for 6 straight hours, describing every detail while Tyler sat there smirking at the defense table like this was all a joke to him. I talked about waking up during the assault, trying to push him off, him holding me down and telling me to stop fighting. I described the blood, the bruises, the pain, trying not to cry while the court reporter typed every word during cross-examination. His lawyer asked why I didn't scream louder, why I didn't fight harder, why I didn't immediately call 911 from Tyler's room. When he asked why I waited so long to report it, I looked him straight in the eye and said, I reported it immediately. But Tyler's friends in blue had assaulted me for trying. The lawyer's face went red and he sat down fast while the judge told the jury to disregard his question about why I didn't report sooner. Manny took a stand next with a whole laptop full of videos and screenshots he'd been collecting for months. Tyler's lawyer stood up and started asking if Manny was jealous, if he wanted to date me, if this was all about getting Tyler out of the way. Manny just looked at him real calm and said he'd been out as gay since sophomore year of high school, and helped me because it was the right thing to do. He pulled up video after video on the courtroom screen showing Tyler at parties, always with drunk girls, always leading them away from the crowd. The next day, they brought in the other victims through TV screens because they were too scared to be in the same room as Tyler. The first girl started talking about her assault and broke down, crying so hard they had to stop for 20 minutes. The second one described how Tyler had done the exact same thing to her, down to the same moves, the same way of getting her alone. When the third victim started describing Tyler's pattern, his mom stood up and ran out of the courtroom with her hands over her ears. Tyler's frat brothers came in next under immunity deals, looking like they wanted to be anywhere else. One of them admitted they all knew Tyler went after drunk girls on purpose. Another one pulled out his phone and showed texts where Tyler kept score of his conquests with extra points for virgins or girls who were passed out. The jury members were shaking their heads and one woman looked like she was going to be sick. That weekend I couldn't eat or sleep or think about anything except what would happen Monday. My mom stayed in my room while my dad made soup I couldn't swallow. Time moved weird, like hours were minutes but also days. Monday morning, the lawyers gave closing arguments, and Tyler's lawyer tried one more time to blame me for drinking and wearing a short dress. The prosecutor stood up and showed the photos of my injuries on the big screen, asking if I chose those bruises, if I chose the blood, if I chose to be unconscious. She reminded everyone that unconscious people can't consent to anything ever, no matter what they're wearing. The jury went to deliberate and came back in 3 hours with guilty on everything. Tyler's face just crumbled as they read guilty for sexual assault, guilty for rape of an unconscious person, guilty for conspiracy to obstruct justice. His dad jumped up yelling that we destroyed their family, and the judge banged his gavel threatening contempt charges. Phillips heard about Tyler's conviction and decided to save himself by pleading guilty to federal charges. The next day he stood there in court, admitting he'd assaulted me and dozens of other women over his career. Not looking sorry at all, just mad he got caught. At Tyler's sentencing I had to give a victim impact statement, and my voice stayed steady, even though my hands were shaking. I told him he didn't just assault me that night. He sentenced me to a lifetime of therapy and nightmares and not trusting people. The judge gave Tyler 15 years with no early release while his mom wailed and his dad kept yelling about appeals. Tyler got handcuffed and led away, and I felt empty instead of happy because justice doesn't fix what happened. A week later at Phillips's sentencing, I testified again about what he did to me in the police station. The federal judge watched the security footage and said it was the worst violation of public trust he'd seen in 30 years on the bench. Phillips got 20 years federal time with no parole, while Barnes got 12 for cooperating with the investigation. 6 months passed before the Department of Justice stepped in and took over our whole police department with something called a consent decree. Federal agents showed up at the station one morning and basically fired half the force while making everyone else go through training about how to handle assault cases. Captain Torres got put in charge of the whole program since she was one of the only clean ones left. The brotherhood that Phillips and Mitchell belonged to got shut down completely, with 12 more officers facing federal charges for covering up crimes. I watched the news coverage from my dorm room where I'd finally gone back to college part-time. Just 2 classes felt like climbing a mountain some days when walking across campus made my heart race and my hands shake. Manny started walking me to class without me asking him to. Just showing up at my dorm every Tuesday and Thursday morning with coffee. My dad used his position to create a whole new oversight board for the police department, and he put Amy on it since she understood what victims needed. We met for lunch sometimes and talked about how to fix the broken system that almost destroyed us both. Tyler's lawyers tried to appeal his conviction, but the judge threw it out and his family had to sell their big house on Maple Street to pay all the legal bills. They left town the same week the university turned the old frat house into a resource center for assault survivors. Sarah helped me see these changes as progress during our therapy sessions, where I realized I hadn't had a panic attack in weeks. She reminded me that healing wasn't a straight line, but I was getting stronger even when it didn't feel like it. Manny called me screaming with excitement when he got his LSAT scores, and then his acceptance letter to law school. We celebrated at the coffee shop where we'd spent so many hours studying together. 2 people who refused to let trauma define our futures. The Rape Crisis Center asked me to speak at their annual event, and I stood in front of 200 people using my real name for the first time. My voice stayed steady while I told them what happened and how I survived it. 3 young women came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes, saying my story gave them courage to report their own assaults. My mom and I started a garden in our backyard that spring, digging in the dirt and planting tomatoes and flowers while we talked about everything and nothing. She told me how proud she was of my strength, and I told her I learned it from watching her hold us together when everything fell apart. We both cried while planting sunflowers that would grow tall and strong from the dark soil. A letter came from Amy saying Phillips got attacked by other inmates and was in protective custody now. Scared every single day. I read it twice, then threw it away because he didn't matter to my story anymore. Just empty space where anger used to live. 8 months after that terrible night, I stood in front of the city council asking for funding for a 24-hour crisis hotline. My hands didn't shake and my voice didn't break when I said the word survivor instead of victim. The proposal passed without a single no vote. And walking out of City Hall with my parents, I knew I wasn't that broken girl in the torn dress anymore. The assault changed me forever, but it didn't destroy me. And now I use my voice to make sure no other girl gets treated like I was that night at the police station. That's my story. And while I'll carry the scars forever, I also carry the knowledge that I'm stronger than I ever knew possible.